Scenes and Adventures in the Semi-Alpine region of the Ozark Mountains of Missouri and Arkansas, 1853, by Henry Rowe, Schoolcraft. Chapter 8, Part 1, Number 18. December 13th, Holt and Fisher were the highest occupants of the White River Valley. They had reached this spot about 4 months before, and had brought their effects partly on pack horses and partly in canoes. The site was judiciously chosen. A finer tract of rich river bottom could not have been found, while the site commanded an illimitable region, above and around it, for hunting the deer, buffalo, elk, and other species, besides the beaver, otter, and small-furred animals which are taken in traps. We tried, at first vainly, to persuade them to accompany us in our further explorations. To this they replied that it was Osage hunting ground, and that tribe never failed to plunder and rob all who fell in their power, particularly hunters and trappers. And besides, they were but recent settlers, and had not yet completed their houses and improvements. As we were neither hunters nor trappers, we had no fears of Osage hostility, for this was, in a measure, the just retribution of that tribe for an intrusion on their lands and the destruction of its game, which constituted its chief value to them. Nor did we anticipate encountering them at all at this season, as they must have withdrawn long ere this to their villages on the river Osage. December 14th. There appears no other way to induce the hunters to go with us, but to aid them in completing their cottages and improvements. This we resolved to do. Holt then agreed to accompany us as a guide and huntsman, with the further stipulation that he was to have the horse which had been left at McGarry's, and a small sum of money, with liberty also to undertake a journey to the settlements below for corn. Hereupon, Fisher also consented to accompany us. December 15th. This obstacle to our movements being overcome, we busied ourselves and rendered to the hunters all the assistance in our power, and made it an object to show them that we could do this effectively. We began by taking hold of the frow and axe, and aiding Holt to split boards for covering a portion of the roof of his house. I doubt whether my companion had ever done the like work before. I am sure I never had, but having thrown myself on this adventure, I most cheerfully submitted to all its adverse incidents. December 16th. This morning, Holt and Fisher, the latter accompanied by his son with 3 horses, set out on their journey to purchase corn, leaving us in the interim to provide fuel for their families. A labor by no means light, as the cold was now severe and was daily growing more intense. Today, for the first time, we observed floating ice in the river, and even within the cabins, water exposed and vessels for a few minutes acquired a thin coating of ice. December 17th. At daybreak, we built a substantial, rousing fire in the cabin of logs several feet long. We then pounded the quantity of corn necessary for the family's daily use. This process brings the article into the condition of coarse grits, which are boiled soft, and it then bears the name of hominy. Of this nutritious dish our meals can generally consist, with boiled or fried bear's bacon, and a decoction of sassafras tea. The fat of the bear is very white and delicate, and appears to be more digestible than fresh pork, which is apt to cloy in the stomach. After breakfast, wishing to give the hunters evidence of our capacity of being useful, we took our axes and sallied out into the adjoining wood and began to fell the trees, cut them into proper lengths of firewood, and pile the brush. About 5 o'clock, we were summoned to our second meal, which is made to serve as dinner and supper. We then carried up the quantity of firewood necessary for the night. This consumed the remainder of the short December day, and before lying down for the night, we replenished the ample fire. This sketch may serve as an outline of our daily industry during the 11 days we tarried with the hunters. December 18th. I have mentioned the fondness of my companion for tea. This afternoon he thought to produce an agreeable surprise in our hostess's mind by preparing a dish of young hyacinth, but she sipped it as she would have done the decoction of some bitter herb, and frankly confessed that she did not like it as well as the 4 substitutes, namely sassafras, dittany, and spicewood. And the manner in which she alluded to it as stower tea plainly denoted the article not to be numbered among the wants of a hunter's life. December 19th. The river having been closed with ice within the last 2 days, we crossed it this afternoon to visit the two pyramidal monuments of geological denudation, which mark the limestone range of the opposite shore. I determined, if possible, to ascend one of them. The ascent lies through a defile of rocks, by means of projections which could sometimes be reached by cedar roots and now and then a leap or a scramble. I succeeded in ascending one of them to near its apex, which gave me a fine view of the windings of the river. The monuments consist of stratified limestone, which has, all but these existing peaks, crumbled under the effects of disintegration. I observed no traces of organic remains. It appeared to be of the same general character with the metalliferous beds of Missouri, and is viewed in extensor like that based on gray or cream-colored sand rock. I found this limestone rock cavernous about 7 miles below. In crossing the river, I was impressed with the extreme purity of the water. The ice near the cliffs, having been formed during a calm night, presented the crystalline purity of glass, through which every inequality, pebble, and stone in its bed could be plainly perceived. The surface on which we stood was about an inch thick, bending as we walked. The depth of water appeared to be 5 or 6 feet, but I was told that it was fully 20. The pebbles at this place are often a small, pear-shaped, opaque yellow jasper. They appear to have been disengaged from some mineral bed at a higher point on the stream. December 20th, observed as a day of rest, it being the Sabbath. The atmosphere is sensibly milder and attended with haziness, which appears to betoken rain. December 21st. We employed ourselves until 3 o'clock in hewing and splitting planks for Holt's cabin floor, when rain compelled us to desist. The following circumstance recently occurred here. 2 hunters had a dispute about a horse, which it was alleged one had stolen from the other. The person aggrieved, meeting the other some days after in the woods, shot him dead. He immediately fled, keeping the woods for several weeks, when the neighboring hunters, aroused by so glaring an outrage, assembled and set out in quest of him. Being an expert woodsman, the offender eluded them for some time, but at last they obtained a glimpse of him as he passed through a thicket, when one of his pursuers shot him through the shoulder, but did not kill him. This event happened a few days before our arrival in this region. It will probably be the cause of several murders before the feud is ended. December 22nd. The rain having ceased, we resumed and completed our job of yesterday at Holt's. The atmosphere is hazy, damp, and warm. My medical skill had not been called on since the affair at the Four Bear Creek, where my companion sprained his ankle. The child of Mrs. Holt was taken ill with a complaint so manifestly bilious that I gave it relief by administering a few grains of calomel. This success led to an application from her neighbor, Mrs. F., whose delicate situation made the responsibility of a prescription greater. This also proved favorable, and I soon had other applicants. December 23rd. About 10 o'clock this morning, Holt and Fisher returned laden with corn. The day was mild and pleasant, the severity of the atmosphere having moderated, and the sky become clear and bright. They appeared to be pleased with the evidences of our thrift and industry during their absence, and we now anticipated with pleasure an early resumption of our journey. To this end we were resolved that nothing should be wanting on our part. We had already faithfully devoted 7 days to every species of labor that was necessary to advance their improvements. December 24th. I had yesterday commenced hewing out a table for Holt's domicile from a fine, solid block of white ash. I finished the task today to the entire admiration of all. We now removed our lodgings from Fisher's to Holt's and employed the remainder of the day in chinking and daubing his log house. Of these 2 men, who had pushed themselves to the very verge of Western civilization, it will be pertinent to say that their characters were quite different. Holt was the better hunter and more social and ready man. He was quick with the rifle and suffered no animal to escape him. Fisher was of a more deliberative temperament, and more inclined to surround himself with the reliances of agriculture. He was also the better mechanic and more inclined to labor. Holt hated labor like an Indian, and like an Indian, relied for subsistence on the chase exclusively. Fisher was very superstitious and a believer in witchcraft. Holt was scarcely a believer in anything, but was ever ready for action. He could talk a little Chickasaw and had several of their chansons, which he sung. Both men had kept for years moving along on the outer frontiers, ever ready for a new remove, and it was plain enough to the listener to their tales of wild adventure that they had not been impelled thus far on the ever-advancing line of border life from the observance of any of the sterner virtues or qualities of civilized society. There were occasions in their career, if we may venture an opinion, when to shoot a deer or to shoot a man were operations that could be performed agreeably to circumstances. To us, however, they were uniformly kind, frank, friendly. For indeed there was no possible light in which our interests were brought in conflict. We were no professed hunters, and our journey into the Ozark hunting grounds was an advantage to them by making them better acquainted with the geography of their position. They could not quit home on such a journey, however, without leaving some meat for their families, and they both set out today for this purpose. It appeared that they had, some days before, killed on a river bottom, about 12 miles above this point in the river valley, a buffalo, a bear, and a panther, but not having horses with them, had scaffolded the carcasses of the two former. Notwithstanding this precaution, the wolves had succeeded in reaching the buffalo meat and had partly destroyed it. The carcass of the bear was safe. They returned in the afternoon with their trophies. They also brought down some of the leg bones of the buffalo for the sake of the marrow. They are boiled in water to cook the marrow and then cracked open. The quantity of marrow is immense. It is eaten while hot with salt. We thought it delicious. We learned by conversing with the hunters that a high value is set upon the dog, and that they are sought with great avidity. We heard of one instance where a cow was given for a good hunting dog. December 25th, Christmas Day. At our suggestion, the hunters went out to shoot some turkeys for a Christmas dinner, and after a couple of hours' absence, returned with 14. In the meantime, we continued our labors in completing the house. I prevailed on our hostess today to undertake a turkey pie with a crust of Indian meal, and the weather being mild, we partook of it under the shade of a tree on the banks of the river. December 26th. Having now obviated every objection, and convinced the hunters that no dangers were to be apprehended at this late season from the Osages, and having completed the preparations for the tour, tomorrow is fixed on as the time of starting. Our hostess mentioned to me that she had a brass ring which she had worn for many years, and declared it to be an infallible remedy for the cramp, with which she had been much afflicted before putting it on, but had not had the slightest return of it since. She was now much distressed on account of having lately broken it, and observing the care I bestowed on my mineralogical packages, she thought I must possess a skill in such affairs, and solicited me to mend it. It was in vain that I represented that I had no blowpipe or other necessary apparatus for the purpose. She was convinced I could do it, and I was unwilling to show a disobliging disposition by refusing to make the attempt. I therefore contrived to make a blowpipe by cutting several small pieces of cane and fitting one into the other until the aperture was drawn down to the required degree of fineness. A hollow cut in a billet of wood and filled with live hickory coals answered instead of a lamp, and with a small bit of silver money and a little borax applied to the broken ring, with my wooden blowpipe, I soon soldered it, and afterwards filed off the redundant silver with the small file. I must remark that the little file and bit of borax, without which the job could not have been accomplished, was produced from the miscellaneous housewife of my hostess. December 27th, rain, which began at night, rendered it impossible to think of starting today. It was the Sabbath, and was improved as a time of rest and reflection. I took the occasion to make some allusions in a gentle and unobtrusive way to the subject, and in connection with some remarks which one of my entertainers had made a few days previously on the subject of religion generally, condensed the following observations. He said that while living on the banks of the Mississippi a few years ago, he occasionally attended religious meetings, and thought them a very good thing, but he had found one of the preachers guilty of a gross fraud, and determined never to go again. He thought that a man might be as good without going to church as with it, and that it seemed to him to be a useless expenditure, etc. Very nearly, indeed, the same kind of objections which are made by careless and unbelieving persons everywhere, I fancy, in the woods or out of them. The hardships of the hunter's life fall heavily on females. Mrs. Holt tells me that she has not lived in a floored cabin for several years, that during this period they have changed their abode many times, and that she has lost 4 children, who all died under 2 years.